Everyone. Welcome to CWWA's National Water and Wastewater Conference of 2020. Great to have you here. And sadly, it's virtual. I really wish we were hanging in Niagara Falls right now. We had to move our events with whatever's going on in our world. On your calendars, Niagara Falls, November 2021, and then Halifax in 2022. But this year, we've turned it into an 8-part webinar series. We have 8 technical committees within CWWA, and each looks at a different aspect. One is just drinking water quality, one's wastewater, biosolids, energy, efficiency, climate change. And each one of them has tackled the task of creating a webinar. And we're going to start today with our climate change group. The bulk of this event will be in January and February. We're basically every Wednesday in January and February. We're going to wrap up at the end of February with a big plenary panel of all of our committee chairs. And we're going to talk about how all these different sessions work together. The theme of all of our sessions is towards a sustainable utility. It's something that our utility leadership committee has been working on, an overall guidance document for all of our members. It's just a very simple guideline moving us towards sustainability, and each of our committees is tackling a part of that assignment. We're hopefully going to have a great social event as part of that too. So if you're just here for today, you should think about signing up for the whole series, coming out for the plenary either way, and we'll get you involved in our social event. Meanwhile, we're here for you as your national association. If you need information, get to our website, cwwa.ca. You'll find everything you want to find there about COVID-19. Sign up for the bulletin if you're not already getting it. And we're doing our advocacy at the national level, whether it's working on drinking water guidelines or the effluent regulations, or advising on the proposed Canadian Water Agency. We're here working for you. I want to thank my team, Kara, for putting this together, Adrian, really working together to make this happen. Support from Dave and Ben online, and then the climate change team led by Haran Sandiniaki, Bobby Pettigrew, and Steve Conrad, really stepping up to help us get this one together. So I appreciate you guys a lot. Now, speaking of Bobby Pettigrew, I want to thank Bobby, who's been a really wonderful supporter of CWWA for years, and this climate. Bobby is with JL Richards, and I want to thank him for his commitment. And part of that, he helped us twist some arms and get a wonderful sponsor today in JL Richards and Associates. They've been great supporting members of CWWA for years. Here today representing JL Richards and Associates is Brian Hine, who's an executive director there. He's actually the environmental market chief, and where he leads JLR's water, wastewater, and solid waste infrastructure business market. After graduating from University of Waterloo, he moved to Ottawa in 1991. And Brian, we should talk, because you were just down the road from me. You were with Water and Earth Sciences, so you must have been in CARP. And I was with Goulburn Township, and we did a lot of work with WISA, so we probably worked together. But you moved over to JLR in 1996, where you focused on design, construction of a range of infrastructure projects, including water and wastewater, treatment plants, pumping stations, class environmental assessments. I saw something in your bio. I liked this one quote where it states, your career is focused on striving to promote collaboration between clients, contractors, suppliers, and other consultants with your own colleagues to accomplish projects that incorporate innovation and provide long-term value that your team can be proud of. I think that's a great slogan for all of us. But with that, I want to thank JL Richards for sponsoring, and I welcome Brian.
Thanks very much, Robert. I appreciate that warm welcome. I wish we were in Niagara Falls as well, because that's my hometown. So I was really looking forward to going back to Niagara Falls. A few slides. I'm not going to take too much time. I know everybody wants to get on with the webinar, but I do have just a few slides to tell you about JL Richards. I know this is a different type of webinar, but I would say that we too have proven to be resilient in these times. So thanks for the opportunity to provide you with a brief overview of JL Richards. I've already had a warm welcome, so I'm just going to go right past that slide. So JL Richards was founded in 1995. We've always been JL Richards. We've evolved over time. We do operate out of 5 distinct business markets, one being the environmental infrastructure, or the vertical infrastructure group, the civil linear infrastructure group. We've got quite a big buildings market as well, and industrial and mining. We operate mainly from the north. And innovative energy, which is kind of our newest market, which is a really neat group of individuals, smart individuals that are really helping with some of these things, including climate change and reducing our carbon footprint. So happy to have them join our team. We do operate out of Ontario largely. We have got offices as seen in the picture here. Our head office being in Ottawa, where I am currently located. But we do also operate around the world, and lots of projects. Our clients generally take us there, and we're quite happy to operate with them on any projects they have around the world. Our environmental infrastructure group, as indicated, is the market that I lead, and we deal with the traditional vertical type infrastructure, water plants, sewage plants, pump stations, and solid waste facilities as well. There's a few pictures there. Our municipal group, which is our second market, is largely linear infrastructure. It's Bobby Pettigrew actually operates within that market, doing a lot of the stormwater. A lot of our stormwater projects. So Bobby's been with JL Richards several years, and he's been a great addition. And I think I just lost the slides. There we go. I'm back. The buildings market is one of our largest markets. We do buildings of all types. We are architects as well as engineers and planners. Industrial mining, we get involved again in some nuts and bolts design work, largely out of our northern offices. And so that's another market. Innovative energy, like I indicated, our newest market. Lots of smart people and helping us to develop lots of projects, very, very much connected with myself and some of our other markets in the water, wastewater field, which we know is changing all the time in this regard. A little bit more on the environmental infrastructure. There's a few projects, just water treatment plants, wastewater plants. We do operate in different project delivery models, including design builds, P3s, integrated project delivery. And we do get involved really at the ground level on our projects, master plans, EA studies of those things. And so we really get involved in doing quite a few of these actually in the last several years. Then our municipal market, like I indicated, more on the vertical side, we do get involved in both new land development and rehabilitation of existing services. Plus we have the land use component and the stormwater, which Bobby is quite heavily involved in as well. And that's a little bit about JL Richards. So I would encourage everybody to enjoy the webinar. And if you have any questions about JL Richards, I'd be happy to answer at any time. And there's my contact information. Thanks again for the opportunity to sponsor this very interesting webinar.
Great. Well, thank you, Robert, and thank you, Brian. I guess at this point we'll sort of start the official aspect of the workshop. So Ben, I don't know if I have to load my slides or if you load them for me, but maybe when we'll start here, we'll see if we can get up there. But I guess I want to thank you all to our Unravelling Water System Resilience workshop. So our facilitators today will be myself Indra, Lindsay, and Haran. And I just get a brief moment to introduce ourselves, at least those that have come up to the stage here, so as you'll be working with us during our breakout session. So just to start, I'm Stephen Conrad. I'm an associate research professor at the Institute for Resource, Environment, and Sustainability at the University of British Columbia. So I previously had chaired the Climate Change Committee for the BC Waterways Association, which has moved to the Risk and Resilience Committee, but I also sit on the Climate Change Committee for CWWA. So maybe I'll turn it over to you, Indra, just a couple of things about yourself.
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. Indra Maharjan. I lead Aqua's Innovation, Efficiency, and Optimization portfolio, and also have been volunteering in Climate Change Committee for CWWA, WEO, and OWWA. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. How about you, Lindsay?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Bolton. I'm the Group Lead Water Resources and Climate Change with CBCL Limited, and I am also a member of the CWWA Climate Change Committee, and I'll be one of the facilitators in the breakout sessions later today.
Great. And Haran?
Hi, everyone. My name is Haran Sandanak. I'm a Senior Water Resources Engineer at the City of Ottawa in the Asset Management Group. I'm also the chair of CWWA's Climate Change Committee. Welcome.
Great. Well, I'll let you all sort of take your seat again in the virtual seats, and we'll have a chance to meet you again when we do our breakout sessions. So this Unraveling Water System Resilience workshop wanted to appreciate everybody who's joining us. It's going to address sort of this question that we've had in the committees is, what is this term resilience and how does it apply to water systems? So the goal of this session is to kind of look at both the contemporary perspectives of water resilience, both kind of in the terms of how it can be defined, and what does it mean for water system performance. I just want to thank you for participating, because your participation in this workshop will help our CWWA Climate Change Committee to really get a grasp around better understanding what resilience means, both to you and the broader water sector. So the desire for water resilience has kind of become a keystone of utility operations and performance, with the industry seeking to look at understanding those components of resilience that would help boost implementation of resilience investments. So there's quite a few descriptions of resilience out there, but there's very little practical guidance that we can call upon for resilience and for water utilities. So in a response, we developed this workshop to sort of shape our committee's effort and the industry's efforts around water resilience, with this long-term goal to help both research and work preceding it to further understand and improve our sector's capacity to improve the understanding and the ability to deliver water infrastructure. So we're running two workshops. We held our first workshop as part of the BC Water and Waste Association's annual general meeting last month, and we're holding this workshop as part of our CWWA AGM, virtual AGM. And we're going to combine the outcomes from these two workshops together into a bit of hopefully some sort of report that we can share with everyone and provide some guidance. So the way the structure works is, today you're going to hear from guest speakers about really these different perspectives of resilience. What are some of the best practices and measures for adapting to climate change and enhancing system resilience across the water sector? And then following these presentations, you're going to participate in a 2030 gameplay exercise. And in this exercise, we're all going to jump to a future and imagine what resilience looks like under a couple different alternative futures. So I'm just going to quickly jump us off with providing a couple perspectives on resilience and sort of the history of resilience. So if we look outside the water sector, we see that this concept of resilience has come from this ecological perspective, this perspective of how ecosystems can really roll with these external shocks and adapt and attempt to these forced changes. So we sort of have this one perspective of resilience where the ecosystem itself is trying to manage these disturbances. More recently, bringing this concept of resilience to urban infrastructure, which is related to water utilities, is in the context of communities and how resilience really kind of refers to the ability of a community not to collapse not to fall apart when you have issues like food shortages or drought or other types of disturbances, right? So we have this kind of concept of resilience around this capacity to maintain and continue the preservations of the system. So you have this one perspective of resilience as a resistance to change, or really a resistance to shock, not necessarily resistance to change. But you have another perspective of resilience around the capacity to adapt. So here we're going to talk a little bit about both of these concepts in the breakout sessions, and I want you to think about these two concepts when you listen to our speakers. But we have this first, what does this mean for resistance? Do we want to stay unchanged? We want to return back to whatever state we had put it in. We want this persistence through time. Engineers love this concept, right? Because we want to design and develop something that is persistent. The other side of resilience deals more with the adaptation aspect, something that's a little bit less applied in the engineering world, this ability to evolve and reorganize and structure. But we do see a bit of this in how we develop systems with our backup systems or interconnections and interties. And so they had just a couple perspectives to get us going. All right, so at this point, I want to bring up our first speaker, Lucy. So Dr. Lucy Rodina is a policy analyst, with Infrastructure Canada. She's also a adjunct professor at the UBC Future to Water Cluster. So her work, she does a lot of work on resilient water, stormwater and wastewater management and natural infrastructure. Lucy holds a PhD in Resources, Environment, and Sustainability from UBC, from the Institute of Resource, Environment, and Sustainability I mentioned. So Lucy's been looking at this aspect of resilience for quite a bit. So in her doctoral work, she studied water governance, she studied resilience, she looked at environmental justice within this urban context, both trying to understand and quantify resilience across a case study in Cape Town, South Africa. So she's also been working on development projects, focusing on irrigation canals and really shaping strategies for her development project. So Lucy's going to give her perspectives on water resilience. Let me get off the stage and let you go.
Thank you for the introduction, Steve. And hello to everyone from Ottawa. I actually recently moved from Infrastructure Canada to Environment Canada. So I actually work more on water governance and water policy now, which is bringing me close to my intellectual home. But today I will share highlights from the research that I did over several years on what water resilience really is and what it entails. And I'll present a high-level overview of a few of the studies that I did, and namely I'll talk about characteristics of water resilient systems, and I'll talk a little bit about key strategies to achieve water resilience. And also I want to note that I look at water resilience for this talk in a more broader sense, so not specific to any particular sector, with the idea being is some of these principles and approaches that we talk about can actually be applied across different aspects of water and across different water sectors. So first, why are we even talking about water resilience? One of the things I did as part of my research is I looked at all of the peer-reviewed academic scientific literature that uses the term resilience in relation to water. And there has been with this graph I want to show you is that there has been a significant uptake of this concept of resilience in relation to water systems. And particularly since 2007, and a lot of this kind of growing academic scientific conversations around water resilience are driven by the notion of the need to adapt to climate change and to adapt to the impacts of climate change to water systems specifically. So water resilience generally is framed around two different ideas, and one of them is improved water security in the face of change and reduce vulnerability to water-related risks and hazards. So think of resilience to drought, for instance, tends to deal with water security, and resilience to flooding tends to deal with reducing vulnerability. So these are two kind of broad ways in which water resilience is talked about in the academic and scientific world. So one thing I did in one of my studies is to scan the academic literature, all the scientific peer-reviewed publications out there for specific characteristics or features of water resilient systems. And you won't be surprised to hear that there are a lot of features and characteristics of water resilient systems. There are lots of lists that we can draw really from the expert literature. And I organize it here in 3 groups for you for the purposes of talking about the diverse aspects of water resilience. So the first group is design or systemic characteristics for built or natural systems, but really we're talking about biophysical systems. So think biophysical systems. The second category of characteristics relates to social systems, and the third one are general characteristics and features that could apply to either biophysical or social systems. So for biophysical systems, the most commonly mentioned characteristics in the literature are robust and having redundancy. And this is largely driven by a lot of literature on engineering system resilience that deals with the ability of water systems to continue to provide services. In terms of the most commonly mentioned social system characteristics, collaborative, involving social learning, decentered or decentralized, and participatory are by far the most commonly mentioned. And this gives you an idea that really resilience to water risks has to do a lot with having power across different sectors and across different scales, and having meaningful collaborations and opportunities to learn. So very adaptive, flexible kind of characteristics. Which leads me to the third category, properties or water resilience principles that can apply to either social or biophysical systems. So the most common ones are adaptive, interconnected, and flexible. And this has a lot to do with the ability of systems to change to either a new hydrologic future or to adapt after a disturbance. In another study, I decided to ask various experts directly how they would rate various strategies for increasing water resilience. Similarly to the big number of water resilience characteristics, there is also a very big variety of water resilience strategies that are proposed in the scientific literature. So what I did is I sent a survey to over 500 experts from a broad range of backgrounds. So I had water planners, engineers, water policymakers, and researchers on various aspects of water participate. And I presented to them strategies to enhance water resilience in 4 different categories: resilience to drought, floods, resilience in freshwater systems, and general water management, as these are very common, the most common themes in which water resilience is discussed in the academic literature. And then I asked them to rate them on a scale of 1 to 5, which ones they think are the most important ones. And this is what came out of this study. With respect to resilience to drought, you won't be surprised that all of the strategies received some support, so more than 3, more than a score of 3. But some strategies received the highest scores by most experts, and these are the ones on the very top. For resilience to drought, these strategies are diversifying water supply sources, water recycling, and switching to less water-intensive livelihoods. And the idea here is that there is a consensus across a wide range of experts that to increase resilience to drought, we really need to work with our current water footprint. So as opposed to expanding water supply schemes, which is, for example, on the very bottom here, we should be thinking about diversifying our water portfolio by using recycled water in combination with conservation, for example. Resilience to flooding. The strategies that received the most support were adopted integrated approach, and this really means management across scales. Using soft approaches or green infrastructure, or some of you know this better by natural infrastructure or nature-based solutions, and diversifying flood response options. So again, there's a kind of a growing consensus among experts across the board that to increase resilience to flooding, we need to draw on kind of a softer or more flexible solutions as opposed to investing in large-scale infrastructure. In terms of general water resilience strategies, restoring healthy ecosystems was the strategy that received by far the most support, and really signaling the idea that experts across the board believe that managing water resilience at the ecosystem scale is of highest priority. Dealing with uncertainty and ability to quickly respond to change and openness to institutional change were also highly supported by everyone. And this really signals the idea that the water sector has to deal with a change in the hydrologic cycle and various other changes due to climate change and other factors. So this ability to deal with change is of highest priority. So a few conclusions that hopefully will stimulate our conversations later. Of course, there is no one approach to water resilience, and this is in part because the water sector is not uniform. And there's a big diversity to water sectors have different aspects, and there's a diversity of approaches in these different sectors. Water resilience, of course, has numerous dimensions, and as you've seen, there won't be one or two strategies that we need to prioritize to build water resilience. We are talking about a portfolio of approaches and figuring out how to balance these different strategies, how to allocate resources, how to prioritize is really our key challenge in building water resilience. So really, for me, the next steps for water resilience is figuring out how to do this integrative work, how to integrate the needs of various sectors, how to integrate resilience across social and biophysical systems, and how to prioritize between these different approaches. Thank you. That's it for me today.
Great. Thank you, Lucy. And that's great. And hopefully if you get put into a table with Lucy, you can ask her some of these questions about those things. So let me bring up Kathy, our next speaker. So Kathy O'Toole is the General Manager of Halifax Water, which is a regulated public utility providing water, wastewater, and stormwater services. So prior to becoming the General Manager, Kathy was the Director of Corporate Services and the CFO with Halifax Water for 9 years. So Kathy's experience is quite broad and includes 10 years with the Halifax Regional Municipality in roles as the Director of Finance, CFO, Director of Infrastructure and Asset Management, and Manager of Energy and Utilities. And so I think, Kathy, are you on? Can we hear you?
I am on. Can you hear me?
I can, yes. Okay, good. So I'm just going to get off stage, and if your camera does work, that's great. If not, we'll just we'll listen to your nice voice.
Great. Well, I'll try to turn it on, and we'll see if that works. If not, you'll hear my voice. So Halifax has been working very collaboratively with climate change with the municipality. And in June 2020, Halifax Council passed a pivotal report for the municipality. It's Halifax 2050. Acting on Climate Change Together is a long-term climate change plan to reduce emissions and help our communities adapt. And this was the effort of the municipality working in collaboration with utilities, the business communities, NGOs, and also with the academic community. 46 actions were identified in that plan, and some of them relate directly to Halifax Water. Some of them are indirectly going to impact Halifax Water. Simultaneously, you know, the Atlantic Canada Water and Wastewater Association has been incorporating climate resilience in updated water supply guidelines and wastewater guidelines. So there's a lot of things going on in Atlantic Canada that are converging and that are the result of a lot of collaboration. One thing that I think is going to help us move forward is that there's a Green CEO Council being formed, and similar to how some large employers moved forward with safety initiatives in Halifax, there was a CEO safety charter. There's actually going to be a Green CEO charter, which will see some of the major government and business leaders basically signing on a commitment to move forward for our community. Halifax Water completed an updated integrated resource plan in 2019. And climate change is one of the lenses through which we developed that integrated resource plan. And the integrated resource plan is really a 30-year plan of what we have to spend to meet the future growth requirements, the future environmental compliance requirements, and our future requirements for asset renewal. And this is just a sample of some of the initiatives that Halifax Water is going to be doing. Some of them we're doing now, some of them are slated for future, that are going to help us become a more resilient utility and a more resilient municipality. So one thing is developing a vulnerability to climate change assessment framework. That's a framework that we would be applying as a screening tool essentially for our capital projects. One thing that we've looked at is projects are now assessed using a design rainfall event that makes an allowance for predicted increased rainfall intensities, and it considers sea level rise. We've also done some work to identify what infrastructure we have that will be impacted by sea level rise. Changes to design criteria take into account climate change, updated IDF curves, and our compliance plan in terms of how we meet, maintain, and achieve anticipated future environmental compliance looks at the impact that climate is going to have, and that would take into account issues like lake recovery, our expectation that we're going to have increasing risk caused by algal blooms, have increasing concerns about taste and odor of water caused by things like geosmin. So that's all feeding into a water supply plant upgrade program for Halifax Water that will basically look at making sure that the technologies and processes we select are robust enough to enable us to be resilient and respond to what we see as the emerging climate-related risks. Some other objectives that Halifax Water will be looking at under this Halifax 2050 plan are net zero and climate resilient new construction, retrofitting our existing facilities, preparing for electric vehicles, and you know, this is only a small subset. It would be difficult to list in 6 minutes all the things that we've got going on that really are going to feed towards resiliency. Some of the ones we're doing now relate to greenhouse gas emission reduction and renewable resources. So renewable energy generation, biosolids energy recovery. We've got a district energy project that is hopefully going to proceed in conjunction with a major redevelopment in the downtown Halifax area, where we'd be taking waste heat from our Halifax wastewater treatment facility and serving heating and cooling in a new redevelopment area. We've got some solar voltaic systems, and you can see this picture on this slide are some solar panels that were recently installed on the roof of our Halifax wastewater treatment facility. And also we're making a lot of investments in IT and technology, and smart meters, smart valves, AI, machine learning. I think these all have significant application to helping us become more resilient in future. Finally, the thought I want to leave you with is that resilience is something that increasingly is going to be embedded and intermingled throughout all aspects of running a utility or a municipality. So right from the levels of service, setting the levels of service that you're going to provide to your customers, or your levels of service in terms of what you want to achieve for environmental compliance. Climate is going to be a lens that has to be applied to budget and business plans to help support requests for expenditures or requests for increasing rates. I think we're going to have to be able to demonstrate cost containment and also greenhouse gas emission reductions. Climate resilience, climate issues are getting into our integrated resource planning. And finally, enterprise risk management. Enterprise risk management is really going to bring some of the climate-related risks to the front. And as we develop mitigation strategies, that is going to build our resilience. So our enterprise risk management system does incorporate climate risks. We set risk tolerance levels, and we're documenting mitigation strategies. And finally, I'm an accountant by trade. I'm a business person. I'm not an engineer or a scientist. So I want to talk about the fact that everything's linked. And when we're planning for future climate resilience, we have to be thinking about how we set aside financial reserves or insurance as ways to mitigate some of the climate risks that we're not going to be able to deal with through good design and good operational delivery. And finally, we have to be looking at our business continuity planning and our emergency management plans also to reflect the future climate-related risks and to ensure we're planning for them and to be resilient. So that's my quick overview of my perspectives on resilience.
Great. Okay, I think I'm back. Thank you very much, Kathy. I do appreciate the input, and I appreciate you trying to put all the work into just a short presentation. We could hold a workshop and a seminar just on your work alone. Let me bring up our next presenter, Karina. While Karina joins us, so Karina Richards is a graduate of the University of Windsor and a master's of environmental engineering and is a licensed professional engineer. So as a supervisor, environmental sustainability and climate change at the City of Windsor, she is responsible for 4 plans which are focused on environmental sustainability and climate change. So Karina was the driver behind the development of the city's climate change adaptation plans in 2012 and 2020. Also the community energy plan, as well as a number of other reports sort of focusing on thermal comfort studies. So Karina is now part of the working teams for both the city's sewer master plan and East Riverside flood risk study, and she ensures that climate change was considered in these critical projects. Thank you very much. Also, in response to the City of Windsor Climate Change Emergency Declaration, she has been working to try and embed climate change in various different municipal decisions. So let me turn the stage over to you, Karina.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Do you have my slides or?
Sorry, it takes me a few seconds, but I can hear you just fine.
Okay.
Let me see. Let's see.
Okay.
We just need to get Karina's slides loaded. Let's see. Oh, Karina, we don't seem to have your slides loaded. So are you able to share your screen? Do you have your slides locally?
Yeah, I do. Let me see. Start works. Okay, do you see that properly or?
We do. You just probably want to swap your slides.
Okay, because I can no longer see you right now, so I've lost you. Okay. So
we are all good. We see your slides. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so sorry about that. Here in the City of Windsor, just a little bit about us first. We're the southernmost city in Canada. We're the one community in Canada probably that you have to drive north to cross into the United States. We lie on the Great Lakes, and we have the Detroit River that basically connects us to Detroit, Michigan. Now, in Windsor, we are no stranger to the impacts of climate change. These figures that I'm showing on the screen right now are basically events that we've had to deal with since 2016, starting with 2 tornadoes that came through our area in 2016. We've had extensive flooding in 2016 and 2017 that in total resulted in about $235 million in insured losses in our community. Based on some research and polling of the community, only about 40% of the residents that flooded actually had insurance to recover. So you can anticipate that 235 million is actually quite a bit more than that. The 2017 storm cost the city of Windsor about $1.6 million just in response costs. And when you look at all these events that we've been dealing with, we've spent in responding to these emergencies over $3 million since 2016. So again, recognizing this, looking at our climate projections, that are basically showing that Windsor is going to be warmer, we're going to be wetter, and we're going to be wilder. How do we look at increasing our resiliency so we're not having that financial hit based on these storms? So our work really started back in climate change back in 2010 when we first got underway to develop our 2012 adaptation plan. This adaptation plan was mostly focused on just increasing precipitation, extreme heat, and missed a lot of important aspects of climate change planning, which included public consultation, community involvement, stakeholder involvement, as well as a lot of other factors that we weren't considering, including like high water levels in the Great Lakes. There's that one figure in the bottom that shows the impacts if we get to our climate future high water levels, what that could mean due to the existing barrier landform height. So a lot of this, while we were doing our climate change adaptation plan, we are also starting to work on our sewer and coastal flood master plan. And that's really where we start getting into how are we going to build resiliency into our storm and our sanitary sewers. So here you can see we had we started in 2018 on our sewer master plan study. And it was really, we modeled the whole city and our sewer network. And then we also took our updated IDF curves and we did the modeling with that to see what is our vulnerability, what is our risk to a climate change future when we're looking at, by the 2050s, 2090s, a 40% increase in rainfall volumes. While we were doing this, Windsor was also getting hit with extremely high water levels in the Detroit River, which actually showed that we actually have had more vulnerability than we actually considered with just the rainfall volumes. So we remodeled the sewer system under the high water level, anticipated high water levels, as well as the climate change storms. And when we were evaluating the alternatives, really the two focuses on is, will those solutions help us build resiliency to climate change, and will it protect the community from flooding? And I just kind of took two screenshots from the plan to show what our modeling looked like under a climate change storm if we didn't act, and then what it could look like after. And then realizing that, there's not going to be enough money to make all the changes we need to address climate change, especially when our greenhouse gas projections are continuing to rise. So the sewer master plan, there was a bunch of different recommended solutions, but really there's the four categories. We need to look at increasing our downstream outlet capacity, and sometimes even changing those. Again, we have gravity outlets that are under the water level at this point, which is causing problems. Coastal flood protection, again, we're looking at barrier landform heights that were set back in the 1980s, and we're realizing those may be insufficient. Source control for both the private and the public side, as well as improving our sewer capacity. Part of the study also, we identified that there is a lot of sources of inflow and infiltration into our sanitary system. 30% of it was actually coming from the public right away, where 70% of it was coming from the private property. So this goes back into the conversation I had about our adaptation planning and how the community needs to be part of all these decisions. Because if we're going to actually make significant changes in our infrastructure and reduce that 70% that is actually from their property, we need to have their buy-in early and often to really create change for this. Now this plan is a $4.9 billion implementation plan to actually address the risks associated for extreme precipitation and high water levels. So it's not going to be something that we're done by in the next 10 years or so by any means. But again, how do we take incremental steps, and how do we prioritize those actions to give the biggest resiliency as soon as possible? And how we're going to do that is basically in partnership with our asset management group. We need to include the solutions and the findings of the plan in our asset management plan. So again, we can prioritize and identify the best actions to move forward with. And in the City of Windsor, we are also right now undertaking a stormwater financing study to see if there is a better way to finance some of these programs, Right now, the City of Windsor is using basically our water bills or our water usage as a consideration for how much we're paying in sewer surcharge. So we're looking at refining that, again, to make sure that we actually have the funding required to move forward with this plan. And what will our success look like? Really, we want to have, under a 100-year storm, we want to make sure that the sewer surcharge is below the typical basement, or 1.8 meters. We want to limit the surface flooding to less than 30 centimeters or top of curb. We want to protect our low-lying areas from high lake levels based on the projected current high lake levels. And we also want to get some resiliency to our climate change storms, especially in vulnerable areas, which we've identified as schools, hospitals, long-term care centers, emergency services, and evacuation centers. And that is it for me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Karina. Thank you to all of our speakers. So we do not have a dedicated question and answer period before we go into the breakout, but if any questions have come up, you feel free to ask them either in our public chat. We also have a Q&A area. If you click on your chat on the top there, you should see a Q&A section. You can go ahead and ask questions there, and we'll try to come back to those after our breakout session, just to make sure we address any questions that have come up. So Ben, if you can put my slides back up, what I'll do is I will jump into the next stage of this session. And what we're going to do is, we've heard these perspectives of resilience from a couple different angles, or a few different angles, and now we're going to jump into the future to try and see and address, what would resilience look like if we were in this future state, and then do a little bit of backcasting from this future state to identify the key themes around resilience, because you've heard from the presenters, there's a number of different angles, a number of different ways we can address water resilience. And so ultimately we're looking forward with the committee and with these workshops is to identify what are some of those key themes. Okay, so everybody put 2020 behind you. I'm sure that's going to be easy for a lot of us to do, but now we're going to 2030 and we're going to imagine a new future. Okay, so in this future, there's a lot of different pathways that the future can take, and there's a lot of different elements in this future. And here's what I want to sort of help you to understand what this future is. So we're in a future where population growth, and we've continued to see increased urban water demand, which is driving urbanization. But we're also starting to see that sustainability behaviors and digital lifestyles are predominant. So these things are growing. Smart infrastructure and big data, they're available to us, right? So we've spent 10 years, we've invested in these things. Advanced technologies such as nanotechnologies and biotechnologies are becoming ever present. This financing question that Kathy brought up, it's now a global business. So it's no longer just an issue of utilities. It's now a global business trying to support infrastructure. This idea of user-centric design practice is now the de facto methodology and service, right? So it's the build environment. We're really moving to this future. Efficiency is driving manufacturing. Climate change is now a real reality, has led to exchanges in extremes. But along with that climate change, these alternative water supply options are becoming more fully accepted, right? And things like recycling existing water, using sewage, and these things. So we're now jumped into this future where we've pushed, and we now exist into this future. So in this future, there's a couple scenarios that we're going to look at that have helped to create this future. So the first scenario, and so half of us are going to be divided into two sessions that are looking at this first scenario. It's just called building or better together. So what this better together scenario does is presents a scenario where industries and utilities have collaborated together to create this stronger and better centralized system. Right? So another perspective to that sort of future is versus the centralized system. What about distributed systems, right? So the second scenario we're going to look at is called autonomous communities. Now, in this scenario, it's the world where households, communities, and industries have become more distributed and more independent and how they collect water, process, distribute water, while considering all these interrelations between water, energy, and food systems, right? So now we have this these two scenarios. I would just call them really the centralized scenario and the distributed system from that. So let's dive into those just a little bit. Now, for you, I have in the handout section, I have posted these last slides that you can pull up on your own computer for you to have reference to, because we're going to be coming back to these scenarios in a breakout. So if you go to your handouts, you'll see, or you should be able to see these last little bits of my presentation here, so that you can refer and have a handout for these things. So the scenario option 1. So this better together. What are this better together scenario points to a couple key points. One, a clean technology economy is predominant. Smart technologies are helping to reduce consumption. So this integrated ICI, we have lots of ICI partnerships, and green infrastructure is being supported, right? So it's really focusing on how the centralized water system can be integrated and, with provision from utilities. So the second scenario, a couple key points. We'll have so again, it's the decentralized. So these decentralized systems are supported by advanced technology at this community scale. We have, a change in the way water pricing is really driving. So high water supply and resource prices have driven a need to have stronger local supply solutions and local supply options. And these extreme weather measures, they have to be addressed at a community scale, right? So again, sort of the centralized and versus distributed element. Okay, so once I'm done speaking, we're going to break out into breakout rooms, and we're going to do a little game playing session. So what we want, just some rules, simple rules. Respect all the opinions. We're all sort of jumping into an unknown future. We're trying to, every opinion matters. Everything's great. We want to try and be as inclusive as we can for everybody on the team. So, I do encourage everyone to participate. Play the game as though it's a reality. So we really are in 2030. We really do sit that. But don't get hung up on any of the details. Don't get hung up on data or the quantities of how much water supply or any of those kind of details that we might dive into on a regular basis. We're just really here to participate and have fun. So your table assignment, we'll have a couple of assignments. First I want everyone at the table. This is a bit of a networking opportunity. So when we do the breakout, we'll go through an introduction, give an opportunity for you to introduce yourself. Try to appoint a spokesperson. So this is someone who's going to present back just the key observations, not to put you on a spot. We don't expect a 10-page report, just sort of the key observations of the discussion. We have facilitators at each table, which are going to be utilizing a PowerPoint template to record the thoughts. And we're going to be answering these 4 questions. Really, these 4 questions focused around this climate change lens, right? So as climate is changing, it's driving the future, and we have resilient. The first question is, we're now in 2030. So what's the state of Canada's water utilities resilience, right? Is it improved in this future state? Is it the same? Like where do we see the future state might be? The second question we're going to look at is, how might utility systems in this current state demonstrate that they're flexible? Like, so where is this first aspect of resilience, flexibility? How do our utility systems demonstrate this flexibility to accommodate these variabilities that are going to occur? The third question is really kind of around that fail-safe idea. So how do these utility systems and again, this current state being 2030, demonstrate fail-safe designs, right? So what is it for those that are in the centralized? What are the aspects that are going to create fail-safe? Those are in the distributed, what again there? And then the last question is really kind of look at where the gaps are between today, the real today, and this alternative future. Okay. So the structure is pretty loose for our conversations. Again, we want to capture the thoughts to help the Climate Change Committee, both at BC and the CWWA, where we can help support research in the directions of the committee and supporting industry. But it's open conversation, open discussion. We'll just use a template here to try and capture those thoughts and move forward from there. Okay, so at this point, see how we're doing on time. We're a little bit on time, so little bit over time. So what we'll do is break out into our groups. We want to come back from our groups at about 15 after. Well, for this last little bit, I want to turn to just a quick report back from the tables. So let's bring our facilitators up. I'm not sure how we'll manage the report back. Maybe us facilitators can just go ahead and do that rather than try to work through the technology of doing that. So let me see if I can actually present my slides. You know, it's a good workshop when you're just getting into the conversation and your organizer says your session is over. So that's what we were doing at our table. So for the facilitators, looks like if you go up to the top, you can present, click present slides and actually add your slides. If you want to do that, I'll go ahead and turn mine into a PDF and upload mine. And give my quick report back. So my table looked at autonomous communities, just as a reminder. And so we try to look at a few key elements from these 4 questions. We're trying to really focus on we are in the future, so we can define what that future is versus what would prevent us from achieving that. So what's this current state? Well, we have good coordination, so we see more resilience across these autonomous communities. We see there's good coordination with integration, right? So we've achieved the ability to do some shared governance and shared management. So there's strong regional guidance that's providing the ability for these local communities to have these different programs. And we also have this strong shared funding that supports these local efforts, right? Because we recognize that if communities are trying to achieve these things on their own, they need to have strong support across that, because every community has different capacities. So we see that. What are some of the fail-safe design elements? We saw that this technology component allows for this distributed control, so that's ability to do that. The smart technologies were allowing us for the knowledge on where to really reinforce these systems, where to spend and allocate our funding and our resources. So some strong abilities there. Also for monitoring, the strong ability for monitoring for how to anticipate where the failures might occur. On demonstrating flexibility, a return to sort of the ecological systems, the connection with ecological systems to provide water services, a stronger connection with the environment, almost really kind of a forced transition between centralized back to the environment. And we saw lots of appropriate priced water to give us more fit for purpose water use. And these things all create redundancy. What are some big gaps? Well, one, we don't have this naturalized or this localized scale infrastructure to support this, to complement our centralized system. We don't have a water aware behavior, to support communities. We're losing our natural buffer with climate change. So the gap is actually growing between, if we're going to return to this naturalized area there. And then one last thing I didn't write quickly, but we're definitely seeing a need to have policy governance oversight in place to regulate how these localized communities would be. So our regulation system does not currently support these distributed. Right. So who else from other tables wants to join?
I can do it from the autonomous group.
Great. Yeah, you want to come up? Turn off mine.
I don't know if that is a good idea, because a lot of issues with the platform here. Not sure if you can hear me or see me.
Good. You're good, Andrew. Go ahead.
So interestingly, a lot of participants in the group were actually, positive about the autonomous communities. However, have some concerns. So for the first one, I think the concern was that with the rise in decentralized systems in Canada 2030, a key barrier will be the pressure to maintain and operate these systems. And in terms of the large and medium systems, even now there exists a lot of communication gaps between different departments and the groups. And with all of these, decentralized systems, it is expected to increase, which might result in inefficiency of operations. In terms of demonstrating flexibility and redundancy, one of the attendees who is representing a First Nations water utility raised a very good point about technological redundancy might be a plus point, but the staffing redundancy will be an issue because, even having one facility and operating one system, staffing is a challenge. When you have multiple systems, that will be a challenge, which is a very good point, I think, in smaller and rural settings. In terms of fail-safe design elements, one of the concerns are things that to be considered for adopting decentralized system was that when you have multiple systems, these systems need to be communicating with one central system, and now you are dependent on communication system which is beyond your control, which is more in control of the communication companies. So that might basically hinder some of those effective communications and networking and controls of the system. And then the last, not the least, was actually we got kicked out, so we weren't able to discuss 2030 to 2020 gaps. Thank you.
Great, that's wonderful, Indra. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Haran, can you come up and do it for room 4?
Sure, we can. I will try and share my screen so hopefully people can see that. Is that up?
It may be loading. We see something.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
We were kind of similar. We were talking about the scenario in which we go together going forward in the future, and we technical difficulties, but we got some elements of the discussion through, and I'm going to try and interpret this as best as I can. Because we started the state in 2020, 2030, and it highlighted some of the gaps as well between now and 2030. And so one of the states or the gaps right now are we have different levels of maturity of different municipalities and utility organizations, both from a technical perspective and a financial capacity perspective. And there's a number of reasons for that. There could be geographic and environmental, hydrologic risk, hazard type issues, but also just size of the municipality and the revenue base and financial capacity as well. So what we envisioned in the future state would be one where we need to have stronger governance models than we do today, perhaps even independent or regionalized type of governance model, so we could better interact with and collaborate with our partners. More public acceptance of the recognition and the urgency for action of resilience type action, and commensurate with that, the public acceptance that we may require changes to revenue, whether that's property tax or rate or something else. And lastly, that this is a future where we envision that the public will want to be more aware of, if not involved in some level in decision making. So data needs to be more complete and coherent, and there needs to be an aspect of transparency to the public as well. So when we talked about flexibility in the future, we talked about a few things. More advanced technologies for things such as treatment, because we have to deal with a wider variety of things going forward. We talked about natural type infrastructure. That's a key factor that we, at least in our discussion, we talked about, that provides flexibility and redundancy, because right now, a lot of areas we're relying on non-natural systems. Having more natural or pseudo-natural type infrastructure will give us that extra resilience factor, give us some flexibility, help us reduce the risk of a variety of hazards. And we talked about an infrastructure planning process that needed to be flexible itself in the future. That ties back to our financial capacity, but we needed to have this ability to make decisions now, construct or install or remediate things now, but also be able to build on that in the future, whether that's, you term that adaptability or something like that. That was the concept we talked about. So those two things were the main things we got through talking about, but that does highlight some of the gaps between now and 2030. We only started to talk about the fail-safe design elements, so I don't have much to report on that one.
Mute myself. Oh, sorry, I unmuted myself. Great. So let's get Lindsay back up for table 3. Thank you, Haran. Wonderful.
Hi there. It's Ben Kerr.
Oh, Ben, great.
Hi, how are you? I'm good. How are you today?
I'm doing fine. I'm trying to navigate my way through this. I've never seen the Zoom looking like this.
Hey, I am back. I don't know if anybody's still online. I had a little bit of connection problem.
I can hear you, Steve.
Okay, I think we may have lost Lindsay, which we unfortunately will not be able to do a report. Oh, Lucy is back, but Lindsay was connected. Then I was frozen for a bit. Now I'm back. So anyways, the virtual things that happened from that particular perspective. I don't know if anybody else can report back from Lindsay's table. If not, we will can only connect if my mic is off. Okay, so Lindsay is having a bit of communication problem, so we won't be able to get a report back from table 3, not because we are ignoring table 3 from that perspective, but I do appreciate that table, and we have recorded it so we can share that, some of those outcomes. Well, at this point, we're at the end of our session, and I just want to thank everybody for your support and working through this. It looks like the one question that we did have on the board was addressed by Lucy. Thank you very much for that. You know, if I may bring Robert back up if he has any kind of final conclusions, or anybody from the Climate Change Committee wants to share a bit about it. But my perspectives and what we're doing from this point going forward is I'm going to be working with my PhD student, combining the outcomes from both our CWWA and our BCWWA session into sort of a bit of an outcomes report. I'm trying to address what are these common elements of resilience that have come up in these 2 workshops, as well as how does it relate to research and industry, to start thinking a bit about what exactly is water resilience for the water sector. And so we will have some sort of report. I don't want to define what that is at this point, but we'll have some sort of report that we can share with all of you here, and for both CWWA and the BCWWA sections. So if anybody else wants to share their thoughts, I'll give a moment.
Hey, if I'm back in, I thank you, Steve, for leading this, and for Haran for your leadership. I thank JL Richards for their sponsorship, and I thank all of you for your patience. We are trying a brand new platform that we thought we'd tested quite a bit in advance, and then we went for the advanced trick of the breakout rooms, and I think we're going to work on that a little more. A whole 8-part series to come, so we better fix all of that. So don't get worried, we'll prepare that. But I thank everyone for their patience through this trial.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Robert. It's so wonderful to see you again. I know you weren't able to make it out here for our session, but at least I got to see you at least once this year.
Yeah.
All right. So for that, I will thank everybody and hope you have a lot of other good sessions that are coming up as part of the conference. And thank you for your attendance. To look at these autonomous communities concepts. So while I'm bringing this up, it'd be great to hear some introductions on who is at the table. You've heard from Lucy and I, but Greg, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. I just threw up my name in the chat there. Greg Kuntz, City of Regina. I recently took on a new role as the manager of energy and sustainability solutions for the City of Regina. So we're going to be that Halifax document they were talking about. We're producing one of those in the City of Regina. So that's my new role here over the next couple of years. Formerly with the utility.
Great, pleased to meet you. How about Bridget?
Hi, I'm Jordan. I'm just broadcasting this meeting for my supervisor who can't make it. So I just started as the utilities compliance tech for Loyalist Township, which is just outside Kingston in Ontario. So I'm just kind of broadcasting this I've got 2 utilities managers on a Zoom meeting listening.
Great. Well, I'll try to make a note here so I don't call you that. Who else do we have on? We have Trudy, I think.
Hi, I'm Trudy Gillis. I'm with the municipality of the County of Inverness in Cape Breton. I am the environmental compliance officer. So we're just actually trying to get our facilities up to compliance, and then we will start with the climate change and trying to make things even better.
Yeah, that's the truth for sure. Yeah. And do we have somebody else on our group? I think let me take a look at the shift more. Oh, I see a Sigrid. Are you there? Okay, maybe I have trouble with audio. So looks like we're having technical issues. I can't seem to share my screen. It pops up and disappears. So if anybody had a chance to do the handouts, I actually will share that again so you can pull it up on your side. So if you go over to on your chat, if you go over to handouts, you should see what we're working on. So if you want to open that on your side, you'll have at least what I'm looking at and what I'm sort of recording on my side. So essentially, we have these 4 questions to chat a little bit about. So we have this future where autonomous communities have been predominant, right? Where we have these decentralized systems, which are technology supported at community scale. We have high water supply resource pricing, so driving local investments. And and all the extreme measures are really trying to address like this local perspective, right? So if our industry goes to this type of future, what does it look like for Canada's water systems in 2030? Does anybody have any thoughts on what the state would look like? Like, is it more resilient, less resilient, more troubles, less troubles?
Maybe I can start with one quick thought. So a lot of people are saying the decentralized systems are more resilient, but if we don't have coordination across various scales, we might actually have the opposite, where resilience is reduced. So I think it depends whether our autonomous communities are integrated with authorities at different scales or whether they're collaborating with each other, especially if they're sharing, let's say, a basin, if they're sharing underground water or other water resources. So it could be more resilient and it could be less resilient.
Well, it's your future, Lucy, so just say they are.
Okay, so I say we're more resilient. We're managing well the risks and the needs in our community, but we are able to collaborate with others when we need extra resources, for example.
Good, excellent, yeah. All right, so somebody.
Greg here. Lucy had a really great point there. Back in 2011, we had huge flooding events throughout Saskatchewan and around the Regina area, and everybody was kind of doing their own thing. It was a free-for-all, and we had approved drainage plans, approved infrastructure work that one community would just direct their runoff to the next community and flood them out, and the next community would direct it back at them. So I think it depends on what jurisdiction you're in within the country. Ontario's got very good regional systems, and they're almost forced to play nice in the sandbox. In Saskatchewan, we don't have that level of provincial guidance, I'll say, or they don't force us to work together. So everybody's doing their own thing, and what it also does is it leads to a lot of investment in a bunch of small systems that don't complement each other, and everybody's fighting for the same pool of money, and it's not necessarily for the greater good or for the most resilient system. So I personally think this is a less resilient system than the larger scale kind of macro system, for lack of a better term.
Okay, let me see if I can capture that.
We almost need to have some regional level, either rules or systems for cooperation, or some mechanism to balance things at a more regional scale in a way.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's sort of, we can learn the lessons from the flood mapping work, right? That you sort of alluded to, is when the government dropped all the flood mapping funding, all the local governments were sort of stuck with having to develop, integrated maps in a non-integrated way. So yeah, good point. Okay, so let's see. How about, so kind of good current state. What about the fail-safe elements? So when we think about fail-safe, we're really looking and thinking about these concepts where if we have disturbances and we have extreme weather events, how might this autonomous community perspective achieve more fail-safe designs?
Right here, I'll go again, and this is largely around, I think, the technology component of it anyways. I think with these autonomous communities and decentralized systems, you can put a great deal of technological control over your infrastructure and understand how it's going to react in a very defined way. And if we do, 10 years in the future, we are going to have, I hear Montreal talk about online storage of their sewer systems, and I dream about it someday. But I mean, I think that's going to be pushed out throughout all municipalities, large enough anyways, in the country. And having these autonomous individual systems that control themselves or are very smart in nature could actually bring us a lot of improvement, and it'll give us a better bang for our buck and where we spend our money. Digging up pipe and increasing pipe size is a crazy expensive thing to do, but utilizing what we have in a more efficient way, costs a fraction of the money, and it'll allow us to accommodate these wider swings in climate or in weather patterns and whatnot with a minimal, maybe even it might even save us money in the long run, right? It might be cheaper than the old way of doing it. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there as long as we can build the right technologies in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so it's kind of like smart technologies will allow for the knowledge that on where to reinforce the systems, right? Where we can spend and allocate resources. I like that. Other thoughts from people in the room? Don't be shy. every thought matters, every thought works, even if it's
yeah, I actually quite agree with that point. I think there's various ways to monitor digitally, for example, flow in water pipes in ways that we can't do right now. So with improved technology, there's probably better ways to kind of anticipate where the system might fail, like better than we can now. But when I think about fail-safe, the first thought I usually have is building redundancy. And that's something that especially some of the older literature talks a lot about. But building redundancy often means essentially like building new systems, which is really, it's becoming harder and harder to invest in building new systems. It's harder to justify doing so. Yeah, achieving redundancy is kind of the harder objective these days. It's harder to achieve that. So I agree that the way to do it is by better manage the systems that we already have in a smarter way.
Yeah, on the redundancy side, and that's something that's always I thought was interesting about centralized versus distributed systems is, is there really an answer on which one is more redundant? Because like, obviously I do a lot of centralized systems. I do distributed energy and centralized water. So from a water perspective, I'm used to seeing, more pumps and more pipes and more storage as ways to achieve redundancy. And when I think that if like 35% of someone's house comes from a local storage or rainwater collection, and is that more redundant? So I guess if you had like a centralized failure, it could be more redundant. But this is the future of autonomous. So how will it be more redundant?
So let's say in our future autonomous community, we have ecological systems. So good, well-designed ecosystems that are able to take on some of the water systems when the gray infrastructure fails. How's that for ambitious?
There you go. Yeah, I like it. Back to the 1800s when you stuck a pipe in the river because the water was there. Just bought.
Well, what's interesting there too, though, is we talk about cost of resources and cost of water and the natural environment. What we're finding is very interesting is as we contemplate driving up, say, the price of water, the only thing that's going to stop people from using water is make it more expensive, right? They'll reduce their consumption. We found that for sure. But then when you do that, they turn to the natural environment. They do things like plant trees. They do things like capture rainwater. And it's almost a forced transition into a more environmental way of doing things. I found you'll have 10% of the population will do things because it's the right to do it for the environment. 90% or 100% will do it because it's cheaper. So I think utilizing, understanding the value of water, this has been said a million times. I don't need to tell CWWA this, but appropriately pricing water is a key to moving these things forward and having these autonomous communities where with AMI technologies and whatnot, where we can accurately determine where water is going, potentially where water is more valuable and how it's being used, can really drive a shift to a more ecological approach to use of water.
Yeah, I wrote that down. The appropriately priced water provided for more fit for purpose water use, and I think that's kind of a key way to be resilient. Is we're not, we're utilizing the right sources of water for the right purpose, and so I think, versus trucking water or pulling water from an ecological system. There's lots of examples for that. I'll just capture that. So we only have a couple minutes, so maybe we should talk about the gaps real quick. So today's 2020. We're back to the COVID world again. And so now we want to achieve this future. What are some of the big gaps we might have to overcome?
Well, one of our big gaps is we don't have natural infrastructure at the scale that we need to actually complement the services that gray infrastructure provides and to serve as a buffer, essentially. So scaling up natural infrastructure at the appropriate scales, I guess. And then also steering behavior towards kind of a more water aware consumer kind of place. I don't know how to call this, but we have one of the gaps perhaps is to shape more conservative water use.
The other thing, I mean, it's bang on your point about that natural buffer. We're already seeing, we're losing that buffer as a result of climate change with invasive species and whatnot. So I think it's also understanding the gap is a lot bigger than we actually think it is, because the gap isn't what it is now. The gap is what it's going to be in 5 to 10 years. And like Regina's facing an issue where we may lose 1/3 of our tree canopy within the next 10 to 15 years. That's catastrophic for our drainage systems and whatnot. So we need to start thinking differently, not just more buffer, but more diverse buffer, so that when we start losing components of it, it's not such a catastrophic event.
Yeah, and some components will change, like some components of our natural environment change because of climate change. So not only do we need to preserve more, but we need to think about the fact that systems will change. So we'll probably need a portfolio of different nature-based solutions.
Okay, looks like our room is about to end, so that's great. Before we kicked out there, I just read a news article about how citizens of Detroit refused to plant trees because they did not trust the government. So they were offered trees, and it just seemed so un-BC to not plant a tree. But it was, yeah, there's lots of interconnections, like with that natural buffer and even response to that natural buffer that needs to be addressed. So I did get your comment there, Sigrid, so I'll make sure I'll try to add that to the slides as well. Thanks for that. And I'll see you back in the main room. So I think you have to go, I don't know if the rooms are ending automatically, but if you go to the breakout room at the top, you can click.
Because of the technical difficulty I'm having here, I cannot see all the people in the room, but please feel free to introduce yourself, your name, your title, and where you work for. And if pandemic was not with us, where would you be today? So maybe I will start with John, and then please pick up yourself. I think you are on mute, John.
I'm mute. John Lamb. I'm the manager of engineering for a new water utility called the Atlantic First Nations Water Authority. And I'm located right now in Dartmouth in my home, but we will be opening our offices in Truro, in Millbrook First Nations, which is outside of Truro. Thank you.
Anybody who wants to go? Catherine?
Hi, I'm Catherine Lafleur, located in Ottawa, Ontario. I work for Natural Resources Canada, and we're focused on adaptation capacity. And so we're providing some financial support to the Halifax group that's doing their update with the climate change lens on their water and wastewater treatment guidelines.
Thanks, Catherine. So Kira, I can't see the list of the people attending, so I'm just going randomly with the videos I can see. Cynthia, please.
Hi, I am Cynthia Campore. I'm actually at Quebec, Quebec City in Quebec, and I am a PhD student from Université Laval.
Thank you. I think with respect to the time, I'll pick a few more, and I can see the name here. Duncan, please.
Hi, I'm assuming everyone can hear me. It's Pamela Duncan. I'm a watershed engineer with the City of Calgary in Alberta. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, I saw your last name. Most probably I didn't figure out which one. Danae? Limits.
Hi, I'm Danae Lemieux. I'm a master's student at the University of Regina in environmental engineering. I also work for the city of Regina, just here just because it's an interesting topic to apply to my thesis. Thanks.
Thank you. And Faisal. We can't hear you, so most probably you're on mute. Maybe we'll go to Lisa.
Can you hear me, Indra?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Hi, my name is Lisa Babel. I'm the Director of Project Planning and Development for the Ontario Clean Water Agency, and I'm working out of my house in Burlington at the moment.
Thanks, Lisa. So I hope you all can see my slides, right? In the screen. So our scenario is scenario 2, and what we're going to discuss today for next about 15 minutes is in terms of what the presenters have spoken today, we're going to talk about decentralized system and how are these systems, boost resiliency, because autonomous communities, as you know, whether it's water, whether it's a collection, processing, and distribution, including energy, gas, and water utilities, are moving towards a decentralized system. For example, there's a trend now that when a new residential development happens, the municipalities expect the municipal development to do some sort of treatment, wastewater treatment before it gets released. If there's a big industry, some sort of pre-treatment before the discharge is being made to the collection system. So in terms of decentralized system, I think the discussions we're gonna have for next couple of minutes is how do you see these autonomous communities, as we call it, through decentralized system assist in achieving resiliency from various aspects, whether it's economy, consumer, industry, technology, energy resources, environment, and governance. Before we do that, I would need a volunteer to present the observations at the end of the workshop when we go back to the main room. And somebody who's interested can type in the chat box. The role of the person would be basically summarize what we discussed in this breakout session and just present it at the end of the session in the main room when you go back. No one? Okay. So we can start the discussion around the room. On so as Steve have mentioned, we have 4 parameters that we need to evaluate. Identify what might be the current state of Canada's water utility resilience, utility systems current state, how might utility systems in current state achieve safe design, and what gaps is it. So when we answer these questions, the idea is to put that decentralized system or autonomous communities in the perspective, and we can start with the first one. Anybody wants to jump in, describing Canada's 2030 state? What do you expect to see some of those autonomous communities by 2030 in Canada?
It's me, Indra. It's Lisa. I'm going to throw in. So if I understand, this is a state of in 2030 where each municipality or each town, small community is pretty much doing things on their own and looking after their own selves. Is that a good summary?
That is correct. And then even within the municipality, they can, if it's a big municipality, they can create the pockets of these zones, like autonomous zone, rather than one wastewater treatment for the entire community. There's a package treatment plans, in different segments of the community.
Yeah. So I guess I have I take a kind of negative view to that approach, and maybe that's just my own personal bias, but I would equate to what it would look like in 2030 to kind of what the state of some of our First Nations communities currently are in 2020, because they pretty much act very much autonomously at the moment. And I think that's part of the challenge, is that now you have a lot of small communities and small systems spread out all over the place. And some would be in excellent shape because they probably may not be seeing as severe impacts. And then others, I think, are going to be in very terrible shape because they may be the ones that are bearing the brunt of a host of different challenges that they might be facing. And so you're putting the responsibility onto perhaps one small community to deal with many, many challenges. Where another community might be lucky enough that they don't have to deal with those challenges, and so therefore has a great system and everything's working well. So that's my 2 cents on it.
In summary, you are saying that you don't see that more adoption of this model by the smaller communities, whereas you will see that in a larger community. Is that what you're trying to say, Lisa?
No, I think that what you would see is that there were going to be some communities that are great. They're very resilient. They've got everything under control because they're not seeing the severity. Whereas there are going to be some other communities that might be seeing a lot more impacts, and they just won't be able to afford to deal with them all. And so they're really going to be struggling to try to keep up all the time. Because I think what it comes down to is the cost of this. Water resiliency is great, but it costs money, and somebody's got to pay for it. And a small community on its own is never going to be able to afford to do everything perfectly.
Anybody want to jump in on that?
Yeah, it's Brad Cooper from City of Ottawa. I didn't get a chance to introduce myself, but I'm a senior engineer with the rail construction program in Ottawa. Formerly worked with Iran in asset management. But to follow on to Lisa's point, I like to even in big city centers right now, I don't find we have great communication between all of the cities and what everybody else is doing. So there's always times when other cities are doing something water resilience wise, and say Ottawa reinvents the wheel or retries to do it, as opposed to being collaborative with everybody to see what's going on around the country. So yeah, small communities for sure, as what Lisa brought up, but even large urban centers. I don't know whether sometimes it's a pride thing or we might know better, but to be totally autonomous is you're not really learning from other people's mistakes,
which is a good observation.
Or gains, right?
Yeah. So with respect to the time, we can come back to this one. I just want to grab another one. I know the planning seems like we underestimated the time needed. So the other parameter we're going to discuss again in terms of autonomous communities is demonstrating flexibility or redundancy. Now we know in our systems we have multiple equipment, just to give example of the equipments, and we all believe that instead of having one big blower, if we have 3 consecutive units in a smaller size, we at least if one breaks down, we have 2 more. So the autonomous systems or the decentralized systems have a similar concept. Instead of one wastewater treatment plant or one water plant breaking out and then the whole community goes into a boil water advisory, you have a couple of more systems, so at least half of the system, similar to electric utilities, are doing the same. So what do you guys think about autonomous systems or decentralized systems in terms of demonstrating flexibility or redundancy? Anybody else who haven't spoken want to jump in?
I could maybe offer some comments. It sounds like we're pretty well on the same page as far as having some concerns about having autonomous or decentralized systems. I fear that we're not going to have the redundancy as far as manpower or resource, human resources, to be able to staff it, because in order to have that many, or I guess many more facilities, you're going to need that many more operators, or at least have access to the the more senior operators when you run into trouble, not just maintaining equipment, but the actual operations, process control, and having the operator, the main operator, come to each facility. That's a lot more site visits and a lot more travel. Not sure how you're going to do that. Sure, you can build in redundancy by having backup equipment and stuff like that, but you still need to maintain it, and so you still need resources. And maybe if it's closer, to the community, you could have community maintainers to maintain the equipment. But I'm a little bit worried about the more senior process control that may or may not be available, and a lot more facilities to kind of juggle.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, John. Appreciate that. So with respect to time, I'm going to move to the next one. I know it sounds really odd. So next one is in the terms of fail-safe design elements. As we know, the bigger systems will have more complex structure, more series and parallel combination of the processes, and one fails, another fails. So the decentralized units are supposed to be, built in as a box, and then less complications and less systems. So what do you think in terms of autonomous systems, cities coming in terms of from the perspective of fail-safe design elements? Catherine, do you want to go? No? Okay. Should I pick somebody else then? Faisal, maybe you want to go? I think Faisal is having some issues with mic. Anybody else who want to go? Danae? Or Pamela? Nope. Maybe come back to Lisa then.
So for a fail-safe design, I mean, I guess you're going to be a lot more, I think, reliant on technology and internet-based equipment to report and monitor and assess what's happening. I'm picturing, maybe one central control panel system where you've got multiple systems reporting into it, and one operator trying to monitor all of these things happening at the same time. So you're going to be very, very reliant, I think, on communication lines and communication channels, which implies that the communications networks throughout the country have also improved and become fail-safe unto themselves. So I think you're becoming more reliant on things that are outside of your own control. If your water and wastewater treatment systems are now extremely dependent on the satellite technology systems for communications, and the first storm that comes through that takes down the satellites or the communication towers, now the whole thing has a domino effect that's going to be a little bit catastrophic. So I guess it depends on how much are we supposed to put ourselves out there that we've solved so many other problems that exist in the world before we tackle this one. But they all are interrelated, and one cannot survive without the other. So okay, that's my 2 cents.
No, that's a good point. Although I don't agree with that, but again, that's a very nice observation. So the last one we have is, okay, if it seems like you guys are all in the wrong room. I thought somebody's going to strongly support for autonomous system. You guys should be joining the Building Better Together group. Anyways, so the last one we have is that as a trend, I know that Europe and United States, there's a lot of utilities that are more moving, and more so over in the electrical side. Electric utilities are more moving into a decentralized system. What do you see the gaps? Like, we heard a couple of concerns about other points. What do you see the gap? Like, if some of the barriers that can be addressed, then it will basically, help you move towards autonomous.
Perfect. So I will share my slides with you. It's just uploading. This is a finicky little software. I've never used Big Marker before, but it's a little bit different.
Yeah, this is the first time I'm using it too.
Okay, perfect. So we are in the better together scenario. Apologies to anyone who was hoping for the diversified scenario. So we're going to be looking at if, Steve already went over this, and we only have about, 15 minutes in our session together, but we're we're looking at where a scenario where industry and utilities are working together and we're collaborating and we have a central system. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to be the facilitator. I'm going to try and move us all through it. But is there anyone who would feel comfortable representing our Better Together group when we go back into the main session to provide an overview of our discussion? Crickets. Okay, well, that's no problem. I can.
I can do it. It's fine. Mike Brandon, not William Fernandez. So I can do it.
Perfect. Perfect. And okay, so we're going to talk about 4 main questions. So we're going to start by identifying what might be the current 2030 state of Canada's water utilities resilience. Just going to flip over here. Okay, so describing our 2030 state. I'll actually stay here so we can see all 4 questions as we're talking. It's because we're running out of time, so I don't want to keep flipping back and forth between these. So under the first one, in our room, we're actually talking about, I don't know if this was clear during the presentation, water, sewer, and stormwater. Do we have representation from all here?
You've got water anyway, water and distribution.
Water for sure. Yeah.
Water.
Any sanitary or storm?
Well, I've got past experience with sanitary.
Okay, so we're going to be a little bit of a water focus group, but that's okay. We can just come clean about that. So any thoughts around what might be the current 2030 state of Canada's water utilities resilience, our water utility that's better together? We're incorporating industry and municipal needs for water in a one-stop shop.
This was Greg from Manitoba. I thought I have something I'd like to see. We're finding that everybody is quite independent in Manitoba here, and we're finding that there's a trend toward regional water cooperatives or regional water organizations, and then the regional ones would be hooked together. So I think in the spirit of cooperation, if we could have more larger regional water utilities and then have some connection between them to support each other, that would be a thought. It's Ian. I think maybe what I would think if we're 2030, within the municipalities that you work in, at least the wastewater and the water units could maybe work together. So more of a recycling, the wastewater plants instead of dumping back into the lakes, it would be maybe a supply for the water plants. Of course, we're going to have new technologies to address that, but that whole concept of reuse and recycle is what I would see.
I would support that too. I think it's a great idea. It's Chris Wolling here from City of Vaughan. I would support that concept too. It just seems like a no-brainer to do it that way. Even starting with just gray water recycling from just might be a good first step for sure.
I think with doing that, we would definitely probably save on electrical costs and power. So.
Do you see the wastewater and water plants being co-located in future?
It would be more, Mike, it would be more, the location would probably be the same, but our piping infrastructure might be different. So discharge from a wastewater plant would go to the intake of a water plant, for example. And then that's what I would see
as I was talking, or as someone said, maybe just the gray water side, you know, rather than just the entire output of the discharge plants.
Yeah, this is William. I think water reuse within new developments and new condo towers will get more and more. And I think by 2020, or by 2030, we're going to see a lot more reused water and lot less dependence on municipal water.
Yeah, Lindsay, the other thing I would think by 2030, we would have gotten better in terms of groundwater management. All those impervious surfaces that we currently have will have retention ponds or better use of rainwater when it comes to manage it before it gets back into the lake for recycling and treatment. So I would think that's what I would see as well.
Another point I like to bring to the table, Chris again from City of Vaughan, is potentially with technology coming, do you need the same quantity per person volume that we're seeing now? Could it be a lot less in the future, just with technology? So is it 300 liters per day per an average household now becomes half that, or a fraction of that. So there's a lot less demand for creating water at the front end and getting more creative that way. So, energy costs get less, etc. So that's potentially one idea as well.
So how does, with a more, with all this water conservation, do we have any turnover issues in our water systems now? We're becoming a lot more efficient. What are types of water quality issues that we could be looking at in the future?
Well, if you go to reuse and recycle, as we talked about earlier, definitely the technologies at the plant, especially the City of Toronto, has to be better. I mean, we're not geared for gray water intake at the plants, and so that would have to change. Lindsay, I think I would suggest by 2030, most of us would have gotten on the conservation train, and along with, I think, sorry, I forgot who we talked about conservation earlier. We would have gotten better off using less water, as like you leave the taps running now forever. Maybe we'll probably get better at that by that time.
I would say too, by 2030, that all the investment in predictive technologies and condition assessments should be paying off in terms of resilience and the reliability that we're addressing things before they happen.
Yeah, Mike, even the practices are practices now by 2030. Our kids will be growing up and they're running the place. And so they've already bought into conservation, which is something the older generation isn't yet.
This is Greg from Manitoba again. Something else that I would hope we get figured out for 2030 is the at the plants. We're just going through a lot of that out in Manitoba, and it's quite capital intensive to relife and upgrade, and just kind of trying to get to the point where our water bills pay for it, which is everything should be paid for our water bills, not through other government subsidies and other kinds of things, but it's a lofty goal.
I like all of this, what we're saying, and I'm trying to connect to this discussion back to how utilities and industry are working together, and they're working better together. Does anyone here work with service industry or work with industry in any innovative ways?
In Toronto, we actually are actually putting generation power for standby power, and we're kind of leveraging that in terms of when there's peak demands. So I can see us working better with the hydro utilities, so they don't have to build bigger infrastructure, and maybe there's some efficiency gain there as well as cost savings for all of us. That's 2030 probably would be getting there.
this is William. We do work with industry to reduce their water consumption right now, and we give them a break if they can reduce their water consumption, because it means we won't have to put plant expansions, which are costly endeavors. And I agree with Greg. I think by 2030, we're going to need to get counselors and people who make decisions into raising water rates and bringing in more revenue to pay for all the services that water looks after.
What, in terms of the last two questions, what gaps exist today? So what are the gaps that we haven't been able to overcome, you know, as of that you could see there are still big question marks in 2030, 10 years from now, around climate resilience?
I would say, Lindsay, I mean, everyone's dealing with these 100-year storms that are happening now every 5 or 10 years. I can imagine 2030 we would have moved past what we currently considered to be something that's going to happen 100 years from now. And maybe we heard about the regional water pool or that concept. Maybe then in those fail-safe scenarios, we would work together. So it will cross municipal boundaries to help each other out. So that's kind of what I would see coming in 2030.
I think, this is Greg from Manitoba, I think there's a technology element here. You know, we control in our distribution system, although we don't have that many human customers, we have a lot of animal customers in southern Manitoba, and we have other kinds of customers, and we have a 9,000 kilometer distribution across most of southern Manitoba. And the technology to be able to monitor at long distances and to adjust and control, and in areas where there's not a good whole technology there, that it needs to be a lot more robust and a lot smarter in order to do what we need to do. And I would expect that there's needs to be a quantum change. And some of the larger plants like Toronto might have a lot of this, but certainly out in the rural areas, there's going to be a major shift in some of the rural areas to try to get the technology where it needs to be to what we need to do in 2030.
I find I really like that comment, and I've been just recently looked into concepts of, I don't know if anyone's familiar with digital twins and the idea of, you know, AI and machine learning. And in 2030, do you think that we'll be leveraging software like this to analyze our system demands and respond to them in real time?
Lindsay, it's Ian. I think that's where I would see as well, AI, because that's something I'm really curious about for my plant that I look after. But I can see that's the future. I mean, for in terms of human interaction with the system, as well as predictive and larger scale planning. I think AI is, a way to go.
One thing we haven't talked about, it's Chris again here from City of Vaughan. One thing we haven't talked about, maybe you kind of pointed to it earlier, Lindsay, is with climate change, warmer water, etc. Will there be other types of microorganisms and things like that that could end up in our systems that we have to treat that we don't treat now for whatever variety of reasons? That how good are we going to be on that side of things, on the science side of things? Will we face new parameters that we're not we don't have to treat now? I don't know what those are. Maybe collectively around the table we do, but something that might be something totally off base for us in the future.
Yeah, that's. Go ahead, Ian.
I was going to say that's definitely true. I mean, we're just dealing now with microcystin, right? And these are emerging contaminants that we just see now, but in by 2030, there'll probably be more that we will have to consider and look after. Sorry, Lizzie.
No, that's all I was going to say is when I look at when I see fail-safe design, I think, how can we possibly plan projects today that can take 5 years to design, construct, when we're finding out about new emerging contaminants and changes with climate change every year? How can we possibly get ahead of it? It's going to be challenging.
Yeah, I think what we're doing, I think all everyone's doing is doing a lot of research. Toronto's partnered up with a couple universities to do research into emerging contaminants. I assume everyone's doing the same. But that, I think, is how you get ahead of the curve, is to kind of get a pulse on what might be coming and then hopefully have enough time to address it before it actually gets to you. So I think that's one of the things we definitely have to invest more into research.
This is Greg from Manitoba. The other thing that's very helpful is Health Canada every year at the window in Ottawa lays out what research they're doing, and usually they're telegraphing off of what EPA does in the States as they look at new contaminants or new things that require regulatory approval. So I find it extremely valuable to listen to the regulators once a year and see what they're studying, what might change. You know, we had recent changes in manganese levels that were regulated before and a number of other things. And so just by staying a little closer to what's going on, it could be helpful. So, suggestion.
They're getting back into the main room now.
How do we do that?
We don't do anything. We just wait for David to do it for us.
Oh, okay.
As a reminder, there are four questions that we're trying to answer here. The first one is, what might be the 2030 state of Canada in water's utility? Oh, actually, sorry, I should back up here. Just so you know, this is the scenario that we're going to be working on together. Hopefully everyone could still hear me. It says we just lost my connection. Can everyone see me?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, good. Technology, right? Okay, so just as a reminder, it's the Better Together scenario that we're working on right now, a scenario where industries and utilities better collaborate in a centralized system. And the key points here is that we're envisioning a clean technology economy, smart technologies to help us reduce our consumption, integrated industrial commercial water.
Oh, lost you.
Paragraphs for different components there in the scenario. Just a note here, under the handout section, you should be able to find the whole slide deck. You could download it there. And if you, I don't know, can anyone see my screen, the Better Together screen?
No.
No? Okay, sorry. Let me try that again. There. Okay. So hopefully you can see that.
Not yet.
No, not yet?
Nope.
The while we're waiting, if you go to the handout section, you could.
Yeah,
you got it?
I was going to say. No, if you go to handouts, we can get it ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. So.
Not showing up in the handouts now either. It was earlier, but now in the breakout room, I don't think we get the handouts.
Okay, let me just upload it right now, and then you guys can grab it as soon as it's up there.
Thank you. You're our guinea pigs. This is our first webinar on this new platform, and the first time trying these breakouts. So.
Okay, hopefully that is doing it.
No.
No? You're still not seeing it? I wonder if it's asking me to do an icon here. I don't know what that picture is, but
well, I think we saw it earlier. Maybe if you just get us back to explaining our criteria, the general thoughts.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay, so Robert, give me a quick thumbs up when you could see that.
Oh, it says loading. And there, got it.
Yeah. Okay. So this scenario, there's 4 questions we're trying to answer right now. What is the current condition under this building together scenario? How might utility systems in this current state demonstrate that they're flexible enough to accommodate inevitable variability? How might utility systems in this current state achieve a fail-safe design? And then finally, what gaps exist today and this between today and this alternative future? So, okay. So this is kind of our whiteboard where we could answer those questions. And let's just start with the first question. Describe Canada's 2030 state. So remember, this is that building together scenario. We have green infrastructure, we have smart technologies, we have partnerships, people working together to manage water use. When you hear those things, what are some of the things that come to mind about what this 2030 state might look like? And please, anyone just jump in.
I think this is Kathy. I think there's going to be a lot of difference in levels of maturity because of technical and financial capacity differences in different regions. There's not a level playing field.
Kathy, did you say technical and financial? Was that the second one?
Yeah, technical and financial capacity. I don't think there's a level playing field right now. It's going to be a lot more difficult for some communities than others.
Okay. Are you thinking some communities by size, or is it by geography, like different impacts that coastal communities, or maybe all of the above?
I think it's all of the above. I think there's geography issues. I think there's financial capacity issues.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
Robert, I imagine
go ahead.
Stronger governance models, that this cooperation will require more independent models that aren't parts of the city and that are more regional. So stronger independent regional models of governance.
I agree with you, Robert. I think there's going to have to be more regionalization.
Okay, great. And any other things when we envision this 2030 state where we're building together and working together? What about the public? Does that is there something about 2030 to get to this state that would be different about the public?
Hopefully, there's more acceptance, recognition of the urgency of some of the actions that need to be taken, and more support for increasing property taxes or rates.
And I think to get that, before that, to get that acceptance means all this overwhelming data that we have, be able to become more coherent and more transparent, and that we're sharing that information with the public. So we have a data overwhelm right now. So I think by 2030, it needs to be coherent and transparent and openly shared.
I think another one would be just for utilities to have more technical resources available. I know that, like there's some CSA standards that came out recently for wastewater. which are helpful, but a lot of the technical guidance can still be pretty piecemeal. And I think consolidating technical guidance on how to address climate change impacts on water and wastewater infrastructure can go a long way.
That's a good point. We should hope for better regulation, maybe.
I think we lost Haran completely now. Kimia?
Yeah.
Any thoughts from you?
I was just wondering about the issue of the aging infrastructure. If in the ideal 2030 scenario, we have managed to renew the infrastructure that needs it.
Yeah, that's critical if we haven't done that. Katrina, you can type anything into the chat zone if you have any ideas. There's a chat.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes. And sorry, I was lost, and I think I'm back now. So we don't have too much more time. Let me just make sure I get some of your thoughts on these other questions. The next one was demonstrating flexibility, or in brackets even redundancy. Any thoughts on that? What would this future scenario look like with respect to demonstrating flexibility for municipalities' utilities?
More advanced treatment technology.
And that's flexibility in I guess the breadth of things that need to be treated. Is that the idea?
Yeah, like I'm thinking from the perspective that we'll probably have more algae to deal with, or we need to have treatment technologies that will allow us to adapt our processes.
Is there a financial aspect of flexibility that people are thinking of here as well? Or Robert, you brought up governance. Oh, David, go ahead.
Sorry, can't hear you, David.
Yeah, I think you just muted yourself by accident.
I think that for the future scenario, sorry if I'm interrupting,
Go ahead.
we have to start utilizing or relying on and enhancing the natural systems. There has to be incorporation of natural systems to move forward. It's sad that we haven't so far, but really, in order to be resilient, we need to rely on those natural systems. They give us the flexibility, they protect our water supplies, and they reduce the risk of all sorts of hazards. And we need to get that in terms of both from the technical side and also like the link to the cooperation between, we're talking about industry as well as the public and individuals. So somehow we're just not moving towards that very quickly.
Any other thoughts? David, I think you were about to make a comment as well. No?
I think infrastructure flexibility.
To work. Sorry.
There's David.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking more in terms of the plan. I guess incorporating flexibility into the infrastructure planning process and phasing things as well. And this ties back to resources and financial capacities, because some communities may not have the capacity to invest some of these measures today. But if you have smart design that incorporates the ability to include upgrades or climate change resiliency measures into the future without having to undo previous work or previous infrastructure components. So I guess in summary, just increasing the flexibility of the infrastructure to be adapted from the get-go.
Okay, great. I'm aware that we're we have a short amount of time. So I'm going to move to the next slide, and please continue to give other comments. We could go back to those slides as well. Now the another aspect here was, how might utility systems in the current state achieve a fail-safe design? And perhaps even a question for this group is, what your thoughts are when you hear that term, fail-safe. Karina?
I was just going to say, it's